All right. So the first thing we're going to start with is we're just going to start from the beginning. We're going to get some really basic understanding about resin exposure, maybe some settings, stuff like that. And and then once we have sort of like a baseline understanding of what's actually taking place in a very meaningful way, then we can start talking about, how do we calibrate, how do we look at something, recognize what's taking place, and then already know inherently how to resolve it, rather than me just saying, or you going on somewhere and saying, how much less time do I need, instead of you already understanding why you need more or less time, and then you can sort of resolve things on your own. So I think it's really important that people, like, a lot of people just want your settings. Like, what settings are you using? Those prints are great. What are your settings? And they want to skip the part where they understand what they're asking, and they just want to get to the answer and jump ahead. I put forth to you that this is a very complex hobby, and there are no shortcuts, and there's no fast way to do it. We can only improve slowly and understand more and more as we go. Me and the people I work with on our team, they do put efforts into trying to help you learn so that the process is faster, but people complain that calibration takes too long. Yeah, but it's worth doing right. Like, it's worth taking the time to do it right. There's no shortcut here. Getting it right is really important, because all of the time you're wasting doing these calibrations is time that you're not wasting failing prints. And so that's kind of what we're gonna move forward with, this understanding that we're gonna learn about the processes, and we're not going to just give you the answers. We're gonna teach you how to find the answers on your own. So that said, let's start off with some basic cornerstone information. Okay, when you're applying UV light to resin, the more you apply light to resin, the more resin that cures. Now, what this means is, and I'm gonna see if I can do some visuals here, kind of on the fly. So we should be looking at lychee here. Let's get me. Hey, there I am. So we're gonna be looking at lychee here, and we're just gonna bring a cube onto the plate. So here's our cube. We're gonna print a cube, right? And let's say today we're using the Sonic Mini 4K with frozen resin. None of this really matters, at 50 microns. And let's say we're doing an exposure time of 2.7 seconds. None of this really matters. We're just throwing out some arbitrary numbers. So right now we have a cube, and the cube size is 10 by 10 by 10, right? So we know that this cube, what we're putting in digitally, is exact. It's not 10.01, it's not 9.99, it's exactly 10. So here's where a lot of people kind of like, they understand it when you say it, but they didn't recognize this as the information they needed to be thinking about when they were making adjustments. And so the important part to note is that as we're doing these layers, layer by layer, so we can see that in this case, there's 200 layers, right? It's 10 millimeters at 50 microns. That layer by layer, we're applying a certain amount of exposure, like UV light, to the resin. And the more UV light, the more resin that cures. All right. Well, so when we say more resin that cures, we have to know that there is a certain amount of resin we want to cure. And if we add more light, we're going to cure more resin than we want. And if we have less light, then we cure less resin than we want, right? So this is the cornerstone of resin printing, is that we understand the cause and effect of exposure times. And so let's say we're going to use some easy numbers here. So let's say we want an exposure time of 2.5 seconds in order to get this object exactly 10 by 10 by 10, right? So we apply 2.5 seconds, all of the other settings, not important right now. And our cube comes out 9.97, right? It's a little bit smaller, right? So it's not much smaller, but it is a little bit smaller, right? So here's where the cones of calibration sort of came from, which is this idea that I'm going to bring in the cones here. It's this idea that the more we expose, the more resin that cures. The more resin that cures, the stronger or weaker something will become. So we can see here all of these little white circles. This is the magic of the cones of calibration. Each one of these circles varies in diameter. This diameter is very precisely tuned so that we can predict success or failure based on any given exposure time. So let's say we print at 2.5 seconds. We are noticing that our result is smaller than we want. What this indicates is that these cone connections are also smaller than we want. By being smaller than we want, they are weaker. If they are weaker, then we can predict that they will fail. And that's where the cornerstone of the cones comes from. Conversely, if we print at 3 seconds and instead of exactly 10 millimeters, we have 10.1, right? We have now made the object larger than we anticipated or that we put in, right? So if we have this connection between the cones right here, and we know that it is actually, let's use this one. We have this connection with the cones here. We know that this is supposed to fail. It's intended to fail, but we have exposed larger, right? The higher the exposure, the larger the result. We've exposed this little section of the cone larger than we intended. We've made this section of the cone stronger than we intended. And then it succeeds where we expect it to fail. Okay? So this understanding is the cornerstone of calibration. We need to know that more exposure means bigger results, less exposure means smaller results. And oftentimes what we're aiming for is the right result. Now, when I say the right result, that can mean a couple of different things, and we're going to dig into that later. But our goal is the right result for our needs, okay? So let's talk, now that we understand more exposure, less exposure, let's look through, actually, we're going to stick to calibration to start, and then let's dig into settings and some other understandings for settings, okay? So if I were to go, and if you guys have seen Once Upon a Six Side, I think is it? Maybe somebody can link them in the chat. So there's a YouTuber who does some wargaming stuff, does some 3D printing tutorials. He has excellent content. He and I chatted recently about the cones of calibration. And if you watch that video, some of the stuff I'm going to say following, it's probably going to be a little redundant, but there's a reason it came up in that video and there's a reason it's coming up now. So, okay. If I were to ask, and this is the part that I think a lot of people don't really get into here, is if I were to ask, what does it mean to be properly calibrated, right? What does that mean? What are the results? Oftentimes people are just not going to have like a really good, once in a six. Yeah, that's it. Yep. So oftentimes, the result of that conversation is that they've never taken the time to actually understand what calibrated means. What they're used to doing is they're going to a calibration part. I'm actually looking for a post, but I can't find it right now on Facebook. they're going to a calibration part. Let me see if I can find a picture here. Let's use the XPS calibration. I think it's called XPS calibration. Resin. Let's see. Here we go. All right. Here's the infinity, whatever shenanigans. Open in a new tab. Okay. Oops. Not what I meant to click on. Here we go. Here. This one. All right. So these posts are definitely from a person struggling, clearly, right? But they're unsure about the results. And so what they do is they come to this part and they say, I want to calibrate. Oh, you don't see my screen. I'm so sorry, guys. Thank you. Screen share. There we go. So what they do is they don't stop and think what does calibrating mean, right? What they do is they go and they grab a calibration part and they try to understand what the results on the part are supposed to look like, right? And those are two separate topics, right? One is just jumping ahead to the answer, and one is understanding the process of how to get to the right answer, okay? And so these parts, what will happen often is we'll go through and then we'll look at looks like this is a Reddit post. Maybe I can pull up a proper picture here. Here we go. And then we're going to look at it and we're going to be like, oh, okay, this infinity symbol is supposed to come to a clean point. I'm supposed to get 10 circles here, and these lines are not showing up, but these lines are right. So we're not actually thinking about what that means. We're just looking at the indicators without processing that. And so if you were to ask people with these questions, which is exactly which of these is the sharpest, why do we need other people's opinions on that? Like, just look at it with your own eyes, right? What they've done is they've forgotten that the idea here is that the result is identical to what you put in. Okay. So we refer to this, like the term that we use for this outcome is called dimensional accuracy. So that test is meant to calibrate your printer so that your end result is dimensionally accurate or dimensionally parallel to what you put in. We put in a cube. The cube was 10 by 10 by 10. The output was 10 by 10 by 10. And now we're calibrated. Okay. So this is fundamentally what everybody is trying to accomplish, but simultaneously not understanding that they're trying to accomplish it, but they're using the process of this calibration part in order to try to achieve it without knowing what they're trying to achieve, because they just hadn't taken 3 or 4 seconds to stop and think about it, right? So some people totally get it right off the bat. A lot of people miss this entirely. So if we were to say, what is the perfect calibration? The answer would be for the part to come out precisely exactly the way that it went in, right? Went into the slicer this way, came out of the printer that way. Now, it is safe to say that's a fair assessment, that is perfect calibration. The problem is that our industry, let's say figurines and miniatures, okay, is that our industry has led itself in a direction where artists are putting out models that are pre-supported, okay? And as soon as we start diving into this pre-supported topic, it becomes a little more difficult. Calibration becomes a little more difficult. And the reason for that is we can, I do professional pre-supports, and my job as a professional pre-support worker, pre-support artist, whatever you want to call us, is to try to account for the widest range of variables across the board as far as what printer are you using, what resin are you using, what settings are you using, right? We're trying to be magicians, and it's impossible for us to account for everything. And so we do our best to sort of like give you the widest range of success. And so oftentimes what will happen is we'll go into supporting a model and we'll have a discussion about the rate of success more than whether or not we have individual success. So I may put a part through my printer and it succeeds, and then you put the same part through your printer and it fails. So then we start then we have this weird dynamic where is it your calibration? Is it my calibration? Are you underexposing? Am I overexposing? Or are the supports faulty, right? Now, this is simultaneously an important topic and also a false logic. So here's a bit of information that's really handy. Underexposure can be overcome by adding more supports. Okay? So we'll have a failure, right? A failure due to underexposure, and we can overcome that failure by adding more supports to the model so we get success. Or we can increase the tips of the contacts so we have more success. Simultaneously, the same failure can be fixed by increasing exposure. So we can find success in a failing model by adding more supports or by increasing exposure. And both solutions will work. So determining which is the right solution can be very complex, especially on pre-supported models. So now we're going to go back and say you have a certain resin and you have calibrated to dimensional accuracy. What you put in is what you get out, and you're seeing failures. So then logic would say that must be a bad pre-supported model. Now, the problem with this logic is that we have left out a number of variables that we didn't know exist, and this happens all the time. If I say the following, you're going to hear it and go, well, of course. But I want to remind you that if you haven't heard this before I state the following, it may not have occurred to you while troubleshooting, right? So we calibrate our printer, we get it all dialed in, we get a failure, we make an assumption about the failure. Now that assumption may be missing some data, and so we need to make sure we account for that data when we go to troubleshoot. So the part that you may forget when doing this is that not all resins are made the same. Not all resins have the same mechanical attributes as the others. Now, I know you know this because tenacious is a flexible resin, and ABS-like is ABS-like, and standard resin is not ABS-like, and fast resin is not standard resin, right? So these manufacturers have different resins with different names. Therefore, the resins must be different and have different features. So you hear that and you go, oh, of course they do. Yeah, duh, right? But what's happening is that people are not applying that same understanding to the successes or failures they're having. And so they don't usually account for the resin when they see that failure. They say, well, I calibrated. The calibration was perfect. This print isn't working. It must be the supports. When it could be poor resin quality. Okay? And so this one teeny little part is constantly missed. And we need to make sure that as a community, we are helping educate each other about all of the variables, right? It could be bad supports. Absolutely could be. It could be a bad calibration. Absolutely could be. It also could be bad resin, and that's the part that gets missed. So the example I often give is like Z-Mud. Z-Mud is, let's see if we can find some Z-Mud resin for sale on Amazon. Let's see, Z-Mud. $16 I think for a liter of it, or 1 kilogram. I don't know. They measure it. I just bought some to do some testing with it. It looks like it may have gone up in cost. Oh, it did go up in cost. I wonder if they got better. We're gonna still use Zmud as an example. $32 is really expensive for Zmud. Zmud used to be like $11 or $12. Is that from? That is from Eunice. Okay. So Zmud notoriously has been a low quality resin for as long as I can remember. Hopefully they've improved the quality of their product, but we're going to use them as an example. So Zmud, can we calibrate Zmud to dimensional accuracy? Yes. Now you guys may have noticed there was another resin on there that was far more expensive. This is a Merilab's TGM7. This is sort of like well-known. Well, I don't know if it's well-known resin, but it's sort of like known to be some of the best resin you can buy for miniatures. And so we have opposing, Zmud at $16 for 500 liters or 500 kilograms, and this TGM7 is almost $90 for 1 liter. So very different price ranges. Now, if we were to run, I'm going to use the Merilab City because it was my favorite calibration part. It was my favorite calibration part before the cones. So if we run the Merilab City with Zmud and we run a Merilab City with TGM7, can we get the results to be the same? And the answer is absolutely yes. Okay. We can get Zmud to print a 10 by 10 by 10 cube perfectly. We can get TGM7 to do the same. So let's say we do that. And then we go and we put a full plate load of pre-supported models, right? And maybe they're supported from a bunch of different artists, doesn't matter. Just a plate load of pre-supported models. We send Zmud through and we send TGM7 through. And half of the Zmud fails and all of the TGM7 succeeds. Okay, this is where we're starting to narrow it down to a problem with the resin, right? Is that some resins have lower tensile strength than others. And this is like one of the most important things to understand about pre-supported models and detail. If you have a low tensile strength resin, you will not be able to print most. Not all pre-supports are the same. Not all pre-supports are as good as others, but we'll say most. You will not be able to print most pre-supported models while dimensionally accurate. Now, in order to get the detail you want out of a model, you need to be printing dimensionally accurate. If we're overexposing the model, all of the details are overexposing too. So a fine detail is going to get less fine as a result of too much exposure time. So in order to get Zmud to print most, I feel like I'm dragging Zmud through, like I'm dragging their name through the mud right now. And to some degree I am, and I have been. Maybe don't take my word for it. Try some Zmud. If it's terrible, then it's terrible. But as of right now, I don't want to state that it is, but it has in the past been notoriously bad. So I want to at least make that clear. If we go and try to print anything with Zmud and we want it to succeed more often, we need to expose a little bit higher in order to have the tips of the supports hold strong enough to hold the model up. But if we're supporting higher, then the model itself is also being supported higher. And as a result, the model is losing detail. And this isn't a problem with Zmud. It's a problem with using Zmud with pre-supports. As stated earlier, if something is underexposed, we can overcome that underexposure with more supports. The same applies to low tensile strength. So we can get perfect prints out of Zmud, but we can't get perfect prints out of Zmud with pre-supported models. We will need to learn how to support for a lower tensile strength resin ourselves in order to get that resin to work properly, which means you're going to be putting a lot more. You might be saving money on your wallet. It doesn't look like it right now at $32 a liter, but you might be saving your wallet some money, but you're going to be spending some time making up the difference. And so you're going to go in and you're going to resupport models yourself, and you're going to add more supports than you normally would because you have to overcome a lower tensile strength. So this is like front to back, this is the cornerstone of understanding calibration. And about half of this stuff gets missed. We just think, run the part. If the part comes out right, everything will print. And that's just absolutely not the case. So we're going to be releasing a new system, new method in January. Hopefully I can get this video done in January, where instead of just presenting you the cones of calibration, I've learned through the process of troubleshooting many people that the cones does the opposite of these other tests, which is the cone ignores dimensional accuracy entirely. All it tests is whether or not it is strong enough, right? You can get really bad results with the cones if you have a low quality resin. And so rather than, I don't want to go forward and say, hey, the cones are magic. All you need are the cones. It's the only thing you'll ever need. The truth of this matter is that it's not as simple as I wanted it to be. It's not as simple as you want it to be. And it's really important that we understand there's more to this than just running one part. There's more to this than a 15-minute calibration part that you can just slam through your printer and in 20 minutes you're going to be up and running. This is a really complex, difficult hobby with way more involved than you being able to shortcut a 15-minute flat calibration part and calling it a day. Not everybody realizes that. And a lot of people think that it's unnecessary. And let me tell you, it is necessary to take the time. So what we need to do instead of just running the cones is we need to determine a couple of things first, then we can make a choice. And so what we're going to have a look at here is J3D, who is on our Discord server. If you're not familiar with our Discord server, make sure you swing by. Let me do a little promotion here. Our Discord server is arguably the best 3D printing Discord server on the internet. And I say that, I know there's a lot of weight behind that, but I say that very confidently. And the reason I say that is because we have a huge group of engaged and active members who aren't afraid to share, who aren't afraid to chat, who aren't afraid to help. And if you're struggling, then all you have to do is speak up, and somebody's going to jump in and they're going to do their very best to help you. Okay. A lot of people join Discord, and there are plenty of on ours too, but a lot of people join Discord. They look for their one answer. They get frustrated and leave. Or they get frustrated and they never show up again. They just mute the server. They're still logged in, but they never say anything. You don't benefit yourself very much by just going silent or going dark. I would always recommend you actually engage. But if you need help, you can't just be silent. You need to speak up, and you need to be able to say, hey, I'm struggling and I don't get it. I would ask that you at least read the documentation, or you at least watch the video before asking for help. Attempt to help yourself first. But if you're stuck, you're stuck and you just need help. And our community has been one of the most responsive and reactive and helpful communities that, we get it all the time, right? People say it all the time. They're like, this is the one server I don't mute. And so go to our server. You can find it through our website, which is tableflipfoundry.com. You can join our Discord right at the top. Otherwise, it's discord.gg/tableflipfoundry. I'll put it here. I'll actually type it in the chat here. Discord.gg/tableflipfoundry. If you found this video through some other means, click that link, join the server, ask questions. read the rules and then follow the steps. That's all I'm going to say, right? If you come in and you can't figure out where to look or where to ask, you are trying to skip steps. And if you're trying to skip steps, then, well, this class isn't going to help you either, because I'm going to tell you how to go through all the steps. Okay. So if you've been on our Discord server, you probably know our admins. That's Chris Catlett or C Catlett and J3D Tech. So those two gentlemen and myself have put a huge amount of time, hands-on time, working on the cones. But J3D Tech had developed another tool. And when I saw that tool at first, I knew instantly how powerful it was. And through some discussion and I mean, maybe 6 or 8 months of discussion and planning and effort and talking and brainstorming, it has become apparent that the cones is not enough, and possibly the cubes are not enough. And so he designed this amazing genius calibration part. And I'm going to share it with you guys here, and we're going to talk about why I think it's genius. We're also going to talk about how it pertains to calibration and how we're going to use this in the future in order to guide us in the direction we need to go to make decisions. So if you haven't seen this, generally speaking, we're going to call this is labeled as BOC, but we're going to call this the cubes of calibration. What we have here, we're going to focus on just the cubes here. We're not going to focus on the other stuff. The other stuff is sort of redundant. We have a print that takes 34 minutes at 50 microns, give or take a little bit. And essentially what you do is you print this print, and when it's done, you take this cube, and you can do one of two things, or you can do two of two things. You can measure this cube with calipers, if you have a set of digital calipers, or if you know how to use the dial calipers, that's fine. This cube is 4 millimeters by 4 millimeters. So you stick your calipers on there, you measure it, it comes out 4 by 4, you're good. This cube is 6 and this cube is 8. Break out your calipers, measure. If it comes out exactly 8, exactly 6, exactly 4, you're done. Okay. If you don't want to spend money on calipers, or if you want to measure with calipers and then do this, you can. The secondary idea behind this is that you can take this cube and put it inside this cube. And if it fits well, like not loose, doesn't wobble around, it's not super small, right? It fits snugly, the walls touch, you can put the cubes inside the other cube, put the box in the box, it says right there. And you can take it out. Your tolerance there is, I don't want to say perfect, okay? Perfect means perfect, but your tolerance is well within an acceptable result of dimensional accuracy. So then you take the 4 millimeter, you put it inside the 6, you take the 6, you put it inside the 8. If it fits, if the box goes in the box, you're done, okay? The genius about this is that there is no question. We are not going online and we're not posting pictures of it and we're not saying, hey, what do you guys think? This was the what I thought the genius of the cones was, right? Nobody to ask. Just results that are very easy to understand. If the box fits in the box, then you're done. If the box doesn't fit in the box, then you're not done. So what we're going to be doing here in the future is we're going to be saying, you start with the cubes, dial your resin in so that the boxes fit in the boxes, okay? Once that takes place, you can rest assured that you have achieved dimensional accuracy to a degree that matters, okay? It might be 1,000th off or even 100th off, but that's not enough to make huge effects in 3D printing. So you have achieved dimensional accuracy. And then what you do from there is you immediately turn around and you print the cones. So you've calibrated to perfect, the perfect calibration, but then you turn around and what you do is you test the tensile strength of the cones. So tensile strength is a really important topic, right? Tensile strength is when you take an object and you pull it apart until it breaks, right? The stronger you can pull it apart straight apart until it breaks, that's tensile strength. There's also flexular strength. There's also hardness. There's other types of strength measurements, but what we're concerned about is when you have a support on a model, how well will that support hold on to the model? That's tensile strength, right? So the cones is a tensile strength test, and the cubes, is a dimensional test. So print the cubes, get the cubes dialed in, box in the box, immediately print the cones and have a look at the cones. If all of your success cones have printed after the cubes, you're done. That's it. You can't get any better. The results you have cannot get better than that, literally, right? When you have dimensional accuracy, your results are identical to what you put in. And if what you put in has X amount of detail, you cannot get more detail out of it. That's it. So dimensional accuracy is perfect. And if your cones print all successful, what that means is that you have a resin that has tensile strength that's strong enough to print most pre-supported models while it's calibrated to dimensional accuracy. That is the dream. That is what you want. If you go and you buy, let's say, Soraya Tech Navy Gray, or I always advocate, I'm not a huge fan of Frozen as a company, but Frozen's products are really good, and Frozen makes Aqua 4K Gray. Aqua 4K Gray has really good detail. It's dimensionally accurate. It has good tensile strength, and it's flexible enough to take a couple of drops with a miniature without breaking. I've bounced miniatures off walls, brick walls, without breaking. So Soraya Tech Navy Gray, I think that's an ABS-like, and Frozen Aqua 4K Gray. I find that the Soraya Tech is a little more brittle, so we often advocate that you mix in a little bit of flexible resin. Also, I think it's Soraya Tech that makes Tenacious, which is a flexible resin. They make two different versions of Tenacious. One is clear and one is obsidian black. I use the obsidian black. They advertise it to be a resin they advertise it as a resin to be mixed in other resins to improve durability. And I think that pigment helps with detail, retaining detail. I think clear resin can muddy up detail a little bit. With the Soraya Tech, you mix in 10%, since Soraya Tech is a little harder than the Frozen. With Frozen, I mix in 5% of that's obsidian black Tenacious. Those are at least two resins that I know that are capable of being printed dimensionally accurate and have the tensile strength to print pre-supported work. Okay. There may be more, but I have to leave it up to you guys to do that testing. Once on a Six Side wants to do testing next year. He and I have discussed. I think I'm going to try to help him. Maybe our community can get involved with helping him do like this like encyclopedia of resin quality. But print the cones, get dimensional accuracy, print the cubes, get dimensional accuracy, print the cones, evaluate the tensile strength from the cones. Now, if you go and print the cones and the success cones don't print, now we have decisions to make about what we want, okay? If we want 3D printing to be easy, we're gonna calibrate using the cones from now on. If we want our prints to be perfect, we're gonna calibrate with the cubes from now on, knowing that if we calibrate with the cubes from now on, chances are we're gonna have to modify pre-supported models to get them to work right, okay? So from then on, you then switch over to the cubes or to the cones. Okay, so I don't know. I'm going to mispronounce your name. So just to be clear, they say, I got lost. Should I print the cones or cubes first? The cubes come first. The cubes are dimensional accuracy test. You want dimensional accuracy first, then we can test tensile strength with the cones. If you have low tensile strength, the cones will show that. If you have high tensile strength, the cones will show that. If you have high tensile strength, you're done. If you have low tensile strength, you are then going to choose how to proceed. If you want most pre-supported models to print successfully, we're not talking the perfect detail, right? We're just talking success. You're going to tune to the cones of calibration, and the idea there is that you are going to get, hey Shamrock, you are going to get the most detail you can get with a pre-supported model out of the cones of calibration. I'm saying a lot very quickly, and I'm losing track of myself. I'm so sorry, guys. The great thing about the cones is that when you print them, you are calibrating to a style of supporting. And by calibrating to the cones, you are getting the highest amount of detail possible out of a pre-supported model with the resin you have. Not the highest detail possible out of the model, but with the resin you have, it's going to offer you success with the highest possible level of detail with your combination of printer, resin, and all of that. So cubes first, get it right. Cones second. If they print properly, if all the success cones print properly, you're done. If they don't, make a choice. Okay. If you choose perfect prints, go back to the cubes, start watching pre-support videos. And I've got plenty on the YouTube channel. That's just look up Table for Foundry on YouTube. This should be it. And I'll try my best to, I know I repeat myself a couple of times. I want to make sure everybody gets it right. I'll do my best to create a video. I think I've got some help maybe from Feather doing some visuals for that video. So with any luck, we'll be able to really lay it out in a really concise way that makes a ton of sense going forward. But it is important not all resins are made the same. Not all calibrations calibrate the same way. I think Denny's Wang has one that's very similar to the cones, but not quite as developed as the cones. So you guys have seen version 2 of the cones by now. We've made some improvements to them. Okay. A couple of things I want to note, right? We're going to talk about the cones for a while. Cones of calibration aren't magic, right? Like I said, it's just testing tensile strength, but we do sometimes find some, undesirable results, we'll say, or results that are not consistent with what we think should be taking place, where maybe the wrong cone is not printing or some such thing, right? Some sort of abnormal result where I probably can find something. Let me see if I can grab something here real quick. So there's a lot. We have so many posts in so many places. I'm sure if you guys are on the server, you'll recognize some. Here we go. Here's a great example of an abnormal result. So here, right? This result is normal. This result here, 2.2, is exactly what we would expect. You probably want to see my screen, I would imagine. Here we go. So 2.2 is exactly what you would expect to see, right? The left cone failed exactly like we would be able to predict that it failed. But then we step up the exposure by 0.1 seconds, and all of a sudden the left cone succeeds and the second cone fails. And then we step up the exposure again and all of them succeed. So this second reading shouldn't take place. Hey, yeah, I'm glad to use your post as an example here. This can be confusing and difficult, and I understand that. And so, so here's the thing: is we looked at the cones earlier, and we know that the cones, and I'll demonstrate here. This cone on the left Did this change? Am I looking at it backwards? My brain is off. Oh no, I'm looking at the wrong side. Here we go. Okay. So this is the success side. This is the same side that we're looking at here. And if we look at the connections, let's go orthographic here. Boop. Here we go. This cone on the left is the smallest of the four. And then this cone is slightly bigger. And then this cone is even bigger. And you can see a progression from left to right here. This progression still takes place in 2.3. Right? The one on the left is the smallest connection. And technically, this second connection is larger. It should be stronger. But it failed. And then third and fourth worked fine. And then same on the other end, right? This defies logic. This doesn't make sense. It just doesn't. It succeeded over here with less exposure. So why did it fail here? This is an important lesson about 3D printing that I think a lot of people could stand to learn. The lesson is these printers are not as precise as we might imagine them to be, right? And it's not the printer's fault exactly. There's a lot of variables at play, right? So let's talk about some variables here. We have lift speed, that's a variable. We have resin, the resin attributes, the resin specifications, right? Tensile strength, hardness, flexular rate, whatever. Those are all variables, right? The type of resin. Temperature is a variable. Whether or not the resin was mixed properly or completely is a variable. Whether or not our LCD screen is performing properly is a variable. The presence or absence of I don't know, Verruca. I've never heard of that. Verruca. Anyway, all right. So like the UV array could be underperforming. That's a variable, or overperforming. That's also a variable that could. Sorry, Valendar. Oh my gosh, I can't talk today. So like there are many variables at play here. FEP, the FEP condition is a variable. The FEP thickness is a variable. Amerilabs posted a very, very good, it's an animation about FEP and how FEP pulls when it's thick or thin or where it's pulling. So this is an Amerilabs animation. So we can kind of see what a difference in just FEP thickness makes, right? This is a variable that takes place. So there are a lot of variables taking place, all inside this liquid, which in and of itself, the fact that it's liquid is a variable. So if we are to like go forward and think like this is going to work perfect every time, we are ill-advised. That is not good logic. We have to understand exactly how many things are involved here, right? So I would love it if the cones came out perfect every time. That would be the best. That's also true. So we, Valendar, that is a conversation we've had on the server at length. At length. We did determine we think that's negligible, but it was something to be discussed. There was a number of more than one discussion about that topic too. But there are a lot of variables, and pixel size is a variable for sure. The amount of activated pixels in any given area would be important too. So it's important to realize that while results like this can be frustrating, please don't think that it's any failure of the cones. It's just that there's a lot going on. Also, when we try to troubleshoot something like this, it can be very difficult to pinpoint what caused this, right? So the way that we troubleshoot is really important as far as how we can like resolve some stuff. When I put out the tome of understanding, I told you to just pay attention to the one most important cone because it was less likely to have that abnormality. It happens, but it's less likely. And if it's printing right, then we know we're on the right page. So the result here was that this was just an abnormal result. We don't know why it's an abnormal result, but we continued down the path and the abnormality disappeared. So the struggle with a mechanical based test like what we're doing is that there are a lot of mechanical variables to keep in mind. Not even just the quality of your resin, but the current. This might be hard to state. If your resin is poorly handled or poorly stored, it's not even the brand and make of the resin. It's that the resin itself could have degraded, or it could be past expiration and causing problems. So that's a lot of stuff to really consider and think about. So abnormal results are bound to happen. They're going to happen from time to time. That's hey, there's another one. Contamination from the general environment. If you mix resins, sometimes resins don't use the same materials and it can affect the resin. If you cleaned your vat with isopropyl and there was still some isopropyl left in your vat, it can interact with the resin. There's just a lot. There's a lot of things that can affect the outcome of a print and cause abnormal results. So it's important that we understand that when we go forward. Nothing's perfect, especially with these printers. We also need to keep in mind that most of these printers are made with the cheapest available parts. Right? There's only so many ways that you can make a printer cheap, right? And so that's what these companies are doing. They're trying to make them affordable and get them in our hands, which is great. But we're not using the highest quality screens or the highest quality stepper motors, and these, they're good. But there's a reason there's $10,000 printers out there and not $500 printers. So, all right. All of that said, I want to let me verify something real quick. I want to make sure I touched on the topics that we need to touch on today. Down in. Okay. Okay. Let's look at. I was looking at 2.2 to work just by lowering the lift speed. So there you go. That's great because that's what I was going to lean into. Let's take a look at, I actually didn't need Blender today. Let's look at some settings. Let's talk about settings for a minute. And Rios Drac, I'm probably going to pronounce your name wrong, says he wants to build one from scratch one day. You actually can. And Chitu Systems sells a bunch of like screens that match boards. There's UV arrays. There's all sorts of stuff. You could actually technically design your own resin printer if you want. There's a couple YouTube videos on that out there too. So if you aspire to do that, there will be no better learning experience than creating your own 3D printer from scratch. I promise you. Let's look at some settings, and I'm going to switch to the Saturn II here because the Saturn II has 2-stage motion control. We're going to talk about, sorry, I should have muted my phone. We're going to talk about some of these settings, and we need to really, as a group, 28 of us plus me, we need to really understand what these settings are, right? So just Rios, can you spell it phonetically for me? So I'm just going to call you Rio. I like Rio. Rio is fine. Perfect. Okay. So let's take a look at this. Let's go over each setting. Let's talk about what that setting is. You guys can sort of like dig through some of this on your own, but we're here. Let's talk about it real quick. Number of burn-in layers. So what is burn-in, right? Burn-in is the very initial layers that print on your model. Okay. Usually it's a raft if it's a supported model. The amount of burn-in layers is this number here, right? Everything below applies to this many layers. So in my case, on my Saturn II, I only use 4 burn-in layers, but I use 6 transition layers. We'll talk about that in a second. So I use 4 burn-in layers, and each of those layers has a 25-second exposure. These layers, why rafts? Supports are very thin and they wouldn't stick to the build plate very well. So you need the supports to stick to a piece of resin. And so the best solution everybody has found is to create a raft to be that resin, and then the supports stick to that. You can print directly on a build plate. That is entirely possible, but it's very hard to remove models that are printed directly on a build plate unless you have a flex, one of those flex plates. And that's a whole nother ball of yarn. They're not bad, but I don't use them. I don't think they're great either. But it just depends on what you want. So you have not. Okay. That's something to dig into. Maybe we should talk about it on the Discord server. But my suspicion is that you have not been printing supports on the build plate without a raft, because even by default, and I'll put a support here on the plate by default. Let me turn on an object. Let's lift this object off the build plate. Utilities here. I'm just going to lift it. I'm going to lift it even further. Let me just do that. I'll put a support here. There's a raft right there. Like by default, you can't. Yeah, that's still a raft. So I use an actual raft, but that's still a raft. There's a reason for that. Now, once I place a bunch of supports on this, you're going to notice this is still just a much larger raft by the end. But you have to have that bottom resin in order for that. Without that, this little pillar just wouldn't stick to the build plate. So hopefully that clears that up. Okay. Lost track for a second. What was I talking about before that? Build one from scratch. Sorry, guys. Settings. Thank you. Okay. So exposure time is how long your burn-in layers are. This directly relates to the amount of adhesion to your build plate. So you turn this way down, let's say 10 seconds, and it's possible that your print doesn't stick to the build plate. But you turn it up to 50 seconds, and it's possible you can't get your print off the build plate, right? So the goal here is to turn this down as low as you can get success. So if you can turn it down to 20 and still get a print, you should do that. If you turn it down to 15 and still get a print, you should do that. But if things stop sticking to your build plate, you're going to want to turn this up a bit until they start again. You can do them in 5-second increments. It depends on what level. I set everything to about 25. Somewhere between 25 and 35 seems to work okay with me. Transition layers. Okay. So here is where I believe I'm correct, but I'm not 100% positive. So I want to put a caveat on this, that I believe this to be true and logically it makes sense. So resin has a resin, when it cures, is exothermic. It releases heat. When you are running these prints on the burn-in layers, 25 seconds of exposure time can generate quite a bit of heat. And it also happens that resin will retain heat fairly well for a while. And so I have 2 thoughts on the transition layers, but I believe if you go from a very warm layer to a very cold layer, you can get delamination, which is where the adhesion between the 2 layers isn't sticking quite right. And sometimes we'll see delamination right where the supports meet the raft. And we'll see that, I believe, when the raft gets a super heavy exposure time, but then the supports start with the normal exposure time, which is oftentimes 10 times less exposure. Which potentially could be, I have allergies, guys, I'm sorry, 10 times less heat. So you're going from a really hot burn-in time to a really cold normal exposure time, and those layers don't want to stick together. Whether or not that's accurate, what the transition layer count does is it will take 6 layers and it will gradually lower the exposure time for 6 layers to go from 25 to 2.6. Now, I don't know exactly what those numbers are, but it would be something like 23 seconds, 18 seconds, 12 seconds, 8 seconds. It will just, every layer will reduce the time gradually until it reaches this after 6 layers. If I put 25 layers in here, it'll do it over 25 layers. If I put 2 layers, it'll do it over 2. For this printer, with the resin I use, this seems to work okay. So lift distance is really, really important. Now, with 2-stage motion control, it's important to notice that we're lifting, and the lift distance is the distance of both of these numbers combined. So it's the sum of both. So, So this particular setting relates directly to lift speeds, and here's how it goes. The initial lift distance is 4 millimeters at 100 millimeters per second on this printer. Some of these settings seem out of whack for the way that I do it. But now the second stage, so it's 2-stage motion control, that's TSMC. The second stage will lift 3 millimeters at 180 millimeters a second. So you start off at the bottom of the print, and for 4 millimeters it will lift nice and slow, and then for the last 3 millimeters it'll move faster. Okay, it's kind of like ripping a band-aid off, I think, is the general idea here. Conversely, retraction is the opposite motion. So when it comes back down, millimeters per minute, I'm sorry. So when it comes back down, the first 3 millimeters is done at 180 millimeters per second, which is fast. And then we slow way down before we get to the bottom. Now, this part, a lot of people miss, and this is really important to note. The reason we slow way down as that model goes back into the vat is that the resin, the liquid resin will displace. So when that build plate goes back into the pool, it will push all of the liquid resin out of the way and create a ton of turbulence inside the vat. Well, when we're curing, we don't want the molecules of that resin to be moving around and swirling still. We want them to be stopped and in place. And so by slowing down that retraction speed, we sort of slow down as the rate at which those molecules are bouncing around inside the vat. So we're lowering that turbulence in the vat while that build plate is going back down. So it would seem that you could just run that as fast as you want. It doesn't matter. It's not part of the print. In our case, we really want to pay attention to that because it can affect the quality of the print when we're done. Now, in burn-in layers, it's probably less important because we're still talking raft mostly. But I still set the setting the same on both. Okay, so these are light intensity. This can be really important. On this printer, it's not so important. But I can give a scenario where I needed to turn this down intentionally. I have an Epax E10 8K, and the UV array on this printer is exceptionally bright. And instead of turning it down in settings, I actually turned it down on the hardware, but it blows out maybe this isn't important to discuss right now, but it's too bright. It causes a lot of difficulties with getting good quality details out of your print. That's something we can talk about another day. So let's look more at these settings. So these are our burn-in layers. The burn-in settings only relate to whether or not your print sticks to the build plate. This is really important. Too many times have I seen new users come in and they say, the cones aren't sticking or the cones aren't printing right. They have a print. It's in their hand. They're taking pictures. and they say, I'm going to turn up the burn-in exposure time. And that's because they don't have it figured out yet. And that's okay. Like, that's part of the process. So it's really important to note, burn-in only relates to 4 layers, and it's the first 4 layers. And it only relates to whether or not a print adheres to a build plate. If it adhered to the build plate, don't mess with these settings. There's no reason to. If your prints are sticking and are easy to remove, don't change these settings at all for any reason. Okay? Once they're set, they're done. The normal layers is where we can really mess around and tweak and tune and play with. I'm an advocate. I say it all the time. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. If you're getting good prints and you're happy with them, don't go fidgeting with stuff, or definitely don't go changing your default profile. Make another profile that you can play with and then go back to your default if you don't like it. But but what if a small print sticks? Then you plan on printing a big piece. Print the big piece. If it doesn't stick, go back and adjust your burn-in exposure, or there could be other variables, right? Maybe your bed isn't leveled properly if it doesn't stick. Maybe your resin isn't mixed well enough if it doesn't stick. But generally speaking, if a small one sticks, then chances are pretty good your big one's going to stick. And if it doesn't, add a couple seconds to your burn-in time. If it still doesn't stick, expect it to be something else. So normal layers. Normal layers work. Yeah, you can do that. You can work your way in. How you confirm these settings is kind of up to you, as long as you do confirm, right? So don't just assume that it's great. Go ahead and work your way up. One thing I want to highlight here, and this is sort of like a cliche thing. Your parents told you as a kid, your parent or your teachers told you in school, your coaches told you if you play sports. It is more true and more applicable in resin printing or 3D printing. Actually, 3D printing in general. It doesn't matter if it's resin or FDM. This statement is the most true and the most applicable of anything you're ever going to notice in life, I've found, is that failures are your best education in this. So sometimes failures can be so frustrating that you forget to stop and think about why it failed. And then you're not learning anything. You're just frustrated, right? But if you can stop and look at it and think about it, chances are you can figure out what went wrong just by seeing the failure. And then you can go in and make an adjustment and fix it, right? That process of resolving your own failure is the best learning. We could do these classes every day forever, guys. But you're going to learn more from failing and fixing a print than you're going to learn from me prattling on for 2 hours on Twitch. So understand, even to this day, as much knowledge and experience as I have, I still fail prints, and then I fix it, and then I figured out what I did wrong. It happens. It is part of the process. I do it far less than when I was new, but I learned so much in the process of failure that got me here to know what not to do. And so I know it's cliche, guys, but failure isn't failure. Failure is just education. And in this, it is the absolute truth, I promise. So don't get frustrated. Don't get frustrated. Keep looking at it. Yeah, experience is the best teacher. This is the most true statement that can be made. Okay, let's look at normal layers. Layer thickness. This is entirely your own prerogative. I will give you my opinion of this. I would never go lower than 30 microns. I print everything at 50. Why do we do this, right? 50 microns is faster to print. So Rio says you're summing up the knowledge gained from those years of experience. I've already learned a lot. Hopefully I'm educating you, but you're still going to learn more from your failures than you're going to learn from me today. I just hope to make you skip a few of those failures, because every failure costs money and time. Okay, so this is your own prerogative. You can choose what you want to do. If you want to print at 10 microns, by all means, have fun. Your prints are going to take a very long time. They're going to look very good. You can print at 75 microns if you want. That is your own prerogative. Your prints are going to be very fast. They are not going to look as good. So that's just what you want out of this. So I print at 50. It seems to be somewhat of a sweet spot. Maybe 40 would work too. The eye has a really hard time differentiating the difference between layers. And if you're printing miniatures and painting, you definitely can't tell the difference after a miniature is painted. So this is where I landed. Print whatever you want. The process of calibrating your printer is identical. Doesn't matter what layer height you print at. The process is the same. You'll have a different exposure time, but the process of finding that exposure time is going to be the same. So, excuse me. So this is the thickness between each layer of the slice. Your normal exposure time is the one that happens 99.9% of the time. That means for every time that it prints a slice of 50 microns after your burn-in layers, it's going to be printing those at 2.6 seconds or whatever number you have here. The lift distance and retract distance are identical to the burn-in times. It's just the distance during printing. I'm going to give you guys a scenario here, right? You're helping somebody troubleshoot, or you yourself are having this problem. And what's happening is we only have 4 millimeters of lift distance, right? So here, this little GIF is a really good example. It may require you to lift your build plate higher in order to get this part to release from the FEP. So what happens if I don't lift my build plate higher? Well, that FEP never releases from the part, and then it goes right back down. If it goes right back down, still connected, there is no new space available for another layer. My print will start to fail, and it will never print from that point on. This lift distance is really important. Now, what if I say, okay, I never want this failure. I'm going to put in 13 millimeters. You absolutely could do that. It will work every time without fail, but it will take a long time to do it. And so what we're trying to do here is we're trying to find a balance, some balance between how far we travel before the FEP detaches and how quick our print goes, because the longer we have to travel, the longer it's going to take to print. And let's say you have a print that has 2,000 layers. Well, we don't want to have to move that extra 10 millimeters for 2,000 layers. Okay, great question. Somebody posted a picture of this recently, but unfortunately I didn't keep it. Maybe I need a collection of failures. It's going to be hard to describe with words, but essentially, if you have a build plate that is entirely full of prints, you're going to see more stuff print around the outside edge. So if you think about it, the FEP is tighter around the outside of the frame than it is in the middle, right? So we can expect the middle is going to have the biggest range of deflection, whereas around the outside edge, it's going to pull off the FEP much faster because the FEP can't stretch as far. And so if you have a build plate full of prints, you're going to see much more success around the outside ring, and it will gradually, like a gradient, look less and less printed towards the middle, and maybe even get to the point where you have absolutely no print in the middle of the build plate. And that's because no layer ever released from the FEP while you were printing. And so you might have one layer on the build plate at that point. So it will sort of look it will sort of look like a little dish, in like the prints out here printed kind of tall, and then it got thinner and thinner until there was nothing in the middle. This is one indicator of whether or not your lift distance is high enough. If you've printed and maybe you're new, you may have heard your FEP slap against the printer. So it's printing the layer, you hear it, it's like lifting, and then whomp, like you hear the FEP slap back down to the build plate or to the screen. This is alarming if you don't know what it is, but it is a beautiful sound if you do know what it is. It just means that your print has detached from the FEP and you are you are successfully printing, right? And so this lift distance is directly related to that sound, and it's also directly related to whether or not your print is successful. Too low and your print will fail. Too high and you'll waste a lot of time. Oh, Rio's currently listening to it. It's a good sound. We like this sound. So your goal is to try to dial this down so that you still have successful prints, but you're not adding too much distance, right? We're not slowing down the print too much. Okay, retract speed is the same. I have a fast retract speed at the beginning, and then I have it slow down at the end. Now, during normal layers, we have wait times. Now, this can be different on different printers. So we call this a light off delay. That's really high, but this isn't a real profile. Light off delay, or on the Saturn II, it's called a wait time. These are too many wait times. We don't need this many, but this wait time is very important to the surface quality of your print. So we talked about resin molecules moving while the light is turning on and trying to cure. And so if a resin molecule is trying to slow down and solidify, but it's currently in motion, you may find that resin, it can be really hard to describe with words. You're going to find that the surface of your print may come out fuzzy. And that's because the molecules on the surface of the resin were in motion during curing, and some molecules left the light area during the curing process. So if we know that 2.6 seconds is supposed to be the duration of time any molecule of resin is supposed to be curing, or molecule, particle, whatever you want to call it, right? We know it's supposed to be 2.6 seconds, but it was a molecule that was traveling at the time it was curing, and it left the light zone in the middle of curing, then it may only have had 1.3 seconds of cure time before it left the light zone. And so that small portion of resin didn't cure fully. And this can cause bloom, what we refer to as blooming. And there's plenty of documentation online about blooming, resin bloom. There's two different types of bloom, but in this case, they refer to this as blooming. We can resolve blooming by adding a small duration of time after the retraction, after the build plate goes back down. We can add a wait time to allow the resin to settle before the light turns on. And that's what this is right here. And you can do wait after print. That doesn't make any sense to me at all. You can do a wait after lift. That doesn't make any sense to me at all. Why would you wait for the build plate to go up and then just have it sit there? It doesn't benefit anything. But going back down leaves room for the turbulent resin to settle and stop moving before that light kicks on, and it will eliminate bloom for you. Usually half a second or 1 second is appropriate. If you're getting more bloom, you can turn this up. Just know that this will happen on every layer. If you have 2,000 layers, you're going to add 2,000 seconds to your print time. Take it or leave it. It's like your own prerogative. It won't make or break your print. It will affect your print quality in the end. Scene scale compensation. I never touched this. I have no idea what it's for or why you would use it. This compensation area isn't available on every printer, but this has to do if you intend on printing directly on the build plate. This will allow you to eliminate what they call elephant's foot. As we learned earlier, the longer you expose resin to UV light, the more the resin will cure. Keep in mind, we are exposing 10 times more light to the vat on our burn-in layers, which means we're going to have a lot of overexposure. CEO Happy says, what if you get gaps like on a tower? I can't imagine what that question is in reference to. So I'm not sure what you mean by gaps. I'm going to take a guess to mean, let's say you're printing a tower and you'll notice that two layers aren't really sticking together. Does that sound like what you're asking? I'm not sure. I'll continue until you answer. Price isn't important. Oh, okay. All right, perfect. So if you're printing, let's say, a tube, and you notice that two of those layers aren't sticking together, right? This is what we call delamination, and there can be many variables that can affect delamination. So, lift speeds, super high lift speeds with super high suction forces can rip apart layers. Exposure that's too low means that the layers are not cured enough to adhere to each other. Temperature and curing are directly related to each other. So if you're, let's say I'm in Nebraska and sometimes we'll have 70-degree days, but we'll have 45-degree nights. And if my printer is near a window, the temperature around my printer may drop 10 degrees during a print time. That drop 10 degrees will change the exposure, right? How much resin is exposing. The viscosity or thickness of the resin is directly related to how much resin will expose to. We start to talk about like light penetration at that point. So the colder something is, the thicker it gets. The thicker it gets, the less the light can penetrate. The less light can penetrate, the less exposure that happens, right? If low exposure can cause delamination, then so can cold temperatures. So you might start off at 70 degrees, but then drop down to 60 degrees and find that a print was fine, and then broke or delaminated. So temperature could be the culprit. So there's a number of things that can cause delamination. Another one is if you don't mix your resin well enough. There's like, I'm no expert, nor do I know every detail to resin, but there's like an epoxy in there. There's a photosynthesizer, which is what reacts to UV light that creates the reaction that turns it hard. There's pigments in there. You need all of these things to be well mixed. If they're separated out, then the pigment settles to the bottom, and what you're really curing is just pigment and not epoxy, and the result you get is bad. So, and maybe doesn't stick very well because it doesn't have the epoxy. So it's really important that your resin is really well mixed, so that you don't get that delamination. But there are a lot of reasons that could take place. Let's see. I think that's it as far as settings. Anything relevant in settings, just know that normal settings are the ones we want to talk about the most. Burn-in layers are burn-in layers. Print time override. Sometimes Lightsheet doesn't calculate the print time accurately, and you can force it. I don't mess with this at all personally, but I think 25C is very accurate. That's about 78 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a very good print temp. I run everything. I have a room with all of my printers and a small heater, so my prints usually run about 85 degrees, which is not typical of everybody's capability, but I have good success there. But 75 is perfectly great. 75, 78, 25C. Try not to drop too much below 25C if you can help it. When it comes to temperature, it's not so much the temperature, it's the consistency of the temperature that makes the biggest difference. So even if you only could accomplish 65 degrees Fahrenheit or 20 degrees Celsius, even if that's the only thing you could do, you could still get good prints. You just need to make sure it stays that temperature and doesn't fluctuate during printing. There are some printing or warming solutions out there, fermentation belts or incubation belts. There's also a couple of like resin heaters you can buy or build yourself, like DIY kits and stuff like that. So you can find solutions that take less electricity, but that part is sort of like out of the scope of everybody else. You'll just have to be creative about how you do it. Yep, somebody says insulated printer. You can put them inside those. They have little things you can grow plants in. I forgot, grow tent or something like that. You can definitely do that as well. So, all right. All of that said, I think that's all of the necessary information you need to understand resin, understand its features, understand the variables involved in printing. You guys should have a really good grasp on calibration and the effects that you're taking. If you're raising exposure, you know what that means. If you're lowering exposure, you know what that means. Some people advocate for high lift speeds. I do not. That's a personal ideology, but I have a little bit of logic behind it. I just think it's unnecessary to be applying extreme forces on something that's already got so many variables involved. That's my personal opinion. Um, let's talk about two more things here. One is I don't know what happened. I didn't have allergies all day, but for some reason, as soon as I get on stream, my nose and my throat are just going crazy. um, it is important from this point that when we go back out into, I just need allergy medication, but if I take it, I'll fall asleep live on stream for you guys. And so, I have water. You know what? I have water. Oh, that's so much better. Okay. So let's talk about, why is this class important? A, it's for your own personal learning. That's great. I want you guys to be better. That's the goal. But simultaneously, I also want our community to be on the same page when it comes to understanding. Okay. You guys, everybody who's been here, everybody who has understood everything I've said, everybody who is committing it to memory as I say it, you guys now have a deeper understanding of this process than the average user on Reddit or Facebook or wherever, right? Some people really enjoy learning this stuff, and you're going to come across those guys, J3D Tech and C Catlet. Those guys, they love and appreciate the process of learning and verifying what they're learning, okay? So you're going to run across those people. When you find them, you need to recognize them, and they are owed immense amounts of respect, because without them, we wouldn't have come this far understanding-wise. So become one of those people. Become one of the people who doesn't accept what somebody's saying because they're saying it, right? Question everything. Understand cause and effect. Make sure that I'm going to use a great example that I used earlier today in chat, if anybody was there. Somebody somewhere thought it was going to be a brilliant idea to cover your FEP sheet in PTFE lube. So this person is a genius, but not because their idea worked, but because they thought outside of the box. They thought critically about what was taking place. They said, hey, it would be very beneficial if there was even less adhesion to the FEP sheet. I'm going to give this a try. Okay. That person has the right mentality. They thought about it. They understood it. They understood what needed to take place, and they set out to solve it. They were wrong, and that's okay. Right. I've been wrong many of times. Yeah. You can post his guide here. Let me step back to this topic here in a second, but our website is currently being redesigned. We are going to be having a community article section on our website, and we'll be hosting J3D's guide directly on our website. So you're welcome to share it here for anybody who wants it right now, but in the future, it'll be really easy to find for you guys. Also, we're going to have some safety guides. We're going to have some, one of our members, Bearded Gamer, he had done a huge amount of tests on anti-aliasing. He had done a huge amount of tests on different slicers and whether or not their settings were identical, stuff like that. So those types of exploration, experimentation, information, that stuff will all make it onto our website in the community article section. Okay, let me step back here. So this guy's genius. He says we have a problem. I'm going to try to fix it. He understands each aspect of the problem, understands that the FEP needs the lowest adhesion possible. He understands that maybe PTFE lube can help release the resin faster. Turns out he wasn't right. That's totally okay. The thing is somebody else who didn't understand everything that was taking place took that idea and said, this is a great idea. And then they told somebody else. And that person hears it and they said, hey, this guy told me that PTFE lube is the shit. And then he goes to somebody else. Nobody from that point on has any understanding of what's taking place. all they're doing is they're taking something they heard and regurgitating it as fact. And this is cancer, right? It is such a bad way of transferring information. If you come across some information that seems viable to you, don't just accept it as truth. Ask questions, discover, brainstorm, theorize, put it to test. This is the only way you can be confident in your answers, and this is the only way, as a community, we can get better and grow. If we don't understand how these things work and why they work, then we will never be able to relay information to people that is meaningful and helpful. We will inherently relay bad information to people by accident, by not doing our due diligence and learning or understanding it ahead of time. So everything I've said today, I do my best to qualify what I'm saying to you with some information and some logic. And while everything I say today may not be perfect, right? I'm a human being. I'm doing my best. It was not without a large amount of thought. It was not without a large amount of discussion with people that I trust. Excuse me. I'm so sorry, guys. This is definitely not making it to YouTube. Oh, thank you. Hey, you're very welcome, Schluterman. Schluterman. You're welcome, man. Welcome. I'm glad to have you in the community. So anyway, I cannot iterate this enough or reiterate this enough to you guys that you need to verify things you hear. If somebody comes to you and they say, Vroom settings are the best settings out there, there's nothing better and everything else is the worst, and you've never tried Vroom settings and you've never thought about Vroom settings before, your immediate answer needs to be, why? Why are they the best? How does it work? And then you need to start thinking about that. Okay, what does that mean? What is that going to change? How does that affect the FEP? How does that affect the resin? How does that affect printing? You then immediately, somebody comes to you and says, auto supporting works perfect every time. Okay, I can tell you for certain that's not true, but even if you didn't know that to be true, you then need to start asking questions. Really, it does? Like, what settings do you use? How does it work? Does it account for this? Does it look for that? If your brain doesn't immediately go towards questioning, then you are not doing yourself a service and you are not doing the people around you a service if you are relaying that information. It is absolutely not true. Do not use auto support. It is not good. It is just not good. Watch my videos on doing supports and you'll learn. But from this point on, 29 of us in this channel now have a deeper understanding than the average user. Okay, this puts us in a position where we can help those people learn and grow, and we can do it in a way that's meaningful and useful to them. Yeah, 100% Boxman. I have an idea. Has anybody tried it? That's a great way if you have questions. It's like, yeah, I've tried it. It sucks. Okay, what happened? If they just say, yeah, it sucks, and then that's the last question you ask, you have not done yourself a service. You need to find out why it sucked. Like, why didn't it work? What went wrong? Can it be improved? Like, those are all things you should always be thinking about. So, I've done something where, I'm not sure if you guys are interested or not interested, but when it comes to giving advice, for one, if you've been on the server recently, I posted a couple times stating that there are basically 3 of us who do a huge amount of troubleshooting for the community. So J3D does, C Catalyst does, and I do. Now, there are more people in our community that help. This is myself and my admins on our server. We try to help with the cones. We try to help in the resin printing channels. We do our best to answer as many questions as we can. We just hit 2,600 members. We cannot handle everyone. Okay. We want to handle everyone. I have a job. They have jobs. We sleep. We eat. So we just only have so many hours in the day to dedicate towards donating our time to help others. It will benefit our community immensely if we have people who are also willing to step in and help to help the people around us get better at this hobby. And it's my opinion that it's not merely just the idea of helping somebody. Let me go. Let's talk. Let's talk for a second, you guys. It's my opinion that it's not just enough to want to help people, it's to help people in the right way, right? Educate them about why, don't just tell them what to do, right? You can't just talk at somebody. You have to reach out to them and get them to engage with you and understand. So I'm enacting a special role on the server. I think we're going to refer to this as like a 3D mentor. I think is going to be the name of the role, or a 3D printing mentor, or community advisor, or a community mentor. So I've kind of put together this little quiz on Google Sheets, and yes. Okay. Camel Rage says it right? Giving understanding and giving answers are two different things, right? You want to teach a man how to fish. You don't want to give him a fish. So, if you have some experience, you got it. Fudge. I can't talk today. Tahauna. Man, I'm done today. I should have my the chat on screen and I don't. But Tahana says, teach a man to fish over giving him a fish. I would love if any of you guys are interested. I have a small quiz. This quiz is just to let me know that you have, just call him T. My name is Ty. People call me T. So I would love it if you're interested in like participating and being helpful and benefiting our community, establishing yourself as a mentor or an advisor in our community. I'm going to post a quiz. It's a very straightforward quiz. And all this quiz is just letting me know that you understand some of the basic functions about what we've talked about, or about 3D printing in general, that you've got a decent grasp about troubleshooting or problem solving. Boxman, I feel like I did not do a great job presenting, in that I have terrible allergies and I've been coughing and hacking and rubbing my nose and doing all this stuff. And then I got sidetracked a couple times, but it is multiple choice. But what I'll do is I'll upload it to YouTube, and it'll be on Twitch no matter what for 2 weeks. So it'll be here for 2 weeks no matter what. So if you want to watch it tomorrow or whatever in the next 2 weeks, I'm not entirely certain it's something I want to post on YouTube. Like, I really want to start producing some higher quality stuff for YouTube and not just dumping my streams to YouTube without editing. But I did record it, and it will be available for 2 weeks. So you'll have plenty of time to go back and rewatch it. That said, I've posted a quiz. Let me pose it. Thank you. I appreciate that. So there's the form again. If you're interested, fill out the form, answer the questions, put your Discord user handle at the bottom of the quiz so that I know who you are. And if you're getting all these questions right, just by filling out this quiz, you're sort of like saying, hey, I'm raising my hand. I'm willing to be seen in the community as an advisor or as a mentor, because you want to help people just get better at this hobby. So if you want to, fill it out. If you don't want to, that's totally okay. I hope you learned a lot from this, and I hope this takes you from a frustrated place, or a place where you're new and you just are confused and you don't know what to do, to a place where Yeah, take it anyway, Camel. Just test yourself. Yeah, I'll review them. Just who cares? Do it anyway. So so if you're new, if you just got your printer, if you found my stream already, like that's amazing to me. I didn't really advertise this except to our community. Welcome to the hobby. 3D printers are freaking magic, you guys. Like legitimately, you can take something from ones and zeros and make them an object you can hold in your hand. It's pure creation. And so if you're just now getting into this hobby, I'm so excited for you. And I fear for you because this is a frustrating and complex thing. And so hopefully through the process of at least this class and otherwise, you can jump on our YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and put in Table Flip Foundry. I teach beginner resin 3D printing class. This was not a beginner class. This was a calibration class. But in the beginner class, we'll talk about how printers work. We'll talk about some fundamentals of setting up a print and slicing. And then I also have some pre-support classes where you can get a deeper understanding of making things work and how to make them work right and all that stuff. So CEO says, I just got a 3D printer on December 7th and I've been watching everything you have online and join the Discord. Dude, that makes me, you guys make me super happy to hear that. I'm like, I really, really like, I have a business, you guys, and, you know, I try to promote my business and do all that stuff and make money. But there's a huge amount of time that we spent in the server that is just, I just want you guys to do well. I want you to love it. I want you to be happy. I want this to just be as amazing of an experience as it was for me. I want that to be for you guys. So, okay, take the test. Put in your username. I will have to do that manually, so bear with me as I do that. I will send you a private message and let you know that I updated your role. I want to talk about a couple of quick things. January, we're hoping to release this new calibration system, method, whatever. So keep your eye out for a video. Now, I know everybody who does media, you know, like streams, who does YouTube, who does TikTok, everybody who does this says like, subscribe, comment, all that stuff. Guys, I don't really have these like huge aspirations to be a YouTuber. I'm just finding out that it's really important for business to make sure that you present yourself and do all that stuff. So if you do see my stuff around, I really hope that you can help me grow. But I think more it's about if you think the information I'm giving is actually helpful, or it's accurate, or it's easy to take, or it's easy to understand, or you just really want to support what we're doing, anytime that you can, please share, interact in some way. I try my best to respond to all questions on YouTube as well. It does help me, but simultaneously, I think through helping me in my efforts, we can help like the people around us get better at this. So it's like win, 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 win. So keep your eye out for that video when it comes out. I think the method that we'll be releasing will change the way that people look at calibrating their printers and will change the way that they do it forever. I think the days of subjective opinions of pictures of flat calibration parts is over, or it needs to be over. And I truly, truly think that we have come as close to the answer as we can get right now. And so when I do put out that video, I'm just going to ask that you guys interact with it, share it, tell people about it. You know, go through that process of like letting the world, help me let the world know that it exists. Also, I am playing around with, and this is the reason I'm bringing this up, is a comment that was made earlier. I am playing around with the idea of creating a Patreon. So that's still sort of being worked out, but I'm thinking about doing like an educational Patreon where I do private classes like once a week or maybe every other week, whether it be printing classes, private sessions where we can just chat and answer questions and troubleshoot. We'll be doing pre-support classes, The pre-support classes will be coming with free minis. So we like that's sort of my goal going into next year. I just have to be sure that um I saw that Discord has some monetization options, and I'm really gonna consider the best way to go about that. But um, I saw that, but I definitely want to. I want to make myself more available to do things like this. The problem is doing stuff like this takes time, and time is money, and I have bills to pay. So I either need to work or I need to make money doing this. So that may be coming up here in 2023. Also, I have 2 or 3 Kickstarters in the works. One is called Tales of Table Flip. That is my own content. So if you join the server, you may have seen Puck. If you saw the news channels, I'll give you guys a little preview of this. Something to keep your eyes open for. I believe it is. I'm shooting for March is the plan for this stuff. So let's share screen. Let's do this. So this will be, just keep an eye out for the Tales of Table Flip. Here's a bigger picture. So you guys should recognize Puck already. We have a whole cast of adorable characters. If you play Dungeons and Dragons, then this will probably like in your wheelhouse. Might gear it a little more towards kids in a way, where if you have children and you want to play. Otherwise, if you just like cute, adorable, wholesome adventures, this is something that's coming out. I'm gonna sneak you guys the smallest crumb of information, but I can't tell you too much because it'll get stolen from me if I tell you too much. Keep an eye out for a very, very, like, if you join the server, right? I know Faye's adorable. All of them, they're all adorable. If you join the server, this is my warning to you not to mute. Don't mute the server, or if you mute the server, visit often. So in March, we're planning an event. The event should have some free content. We're calling it March of the Mimics. I'm going to try to get a bunch of illustrators. I think people underappreciate artwork like this, like we're seeing on screen. We all tend to gravitate towards the 3D stuff, and then this 2D stuff gets left behind. And I think this stuff is just as important. So it's going to be Illustrator based, and maybe even get some 3D modeling stuff in there. But then also, so we do giveaways every now and again. If you guys have been here with me for a while, you were here for the 1,000 member giveaway. That was huge. If you've been here in December, you guys hopefully caught some of December days. We gave away a ton of content in December. I hope to continue to be able to do that more and more. The catch to doing these giveaways is that I promise artists exposure, right? Their names are getting out there. They're giving away their hard-earned work to you guys in hopes that you like their work and will go support them. So if you stay and you do these giveaways, I want to encourage you to look to these artists first when you're ready to go buy something. If they don't have what you're looking for, that's okay. But if you're like, hey, I need some gnomes, well, maybe check out some of these artists that gave you something free first, and see if they have anything. And then if they don't, go peruse the internet or whatever. But I won't be able to continue to get them to give us free stuff unless it's worth it to them. And the only way it's worth it to them is if you guys go out there and support them as well. So keep that in mind. Going into the future is that I'll be continuing to do giveaways and events. We're hoping to expand engagement on the server, so maybe look for new server bots, but also we'll be seeing some new community leaders show up that'll be hosting painting events and maybe 3D printing challenges, crafting challenges, storytelling challenges, stuff like that. And then the little crumb I'm going to give you guys is this. This is something I'm working on with a partner. We think it will change everybody's view on resin printing from here on. We are creating a device that you can buy that will be a supplement to your 3D printing experience. right now, that is all I'm going to tell you guys. But keep your ears open on the server. As we start getting closer, as we have stuff more dialed in, we just have to be very careful because every innovation that has ever been made in 3D printing has been ripped off in China. So we need to be careful about how much we release and how soon we release it so that we can actually release a product for real and not lose all of our hard work to another company. So keep your eyes open for that. I think that's all I got for you guys today. I am removing the version 2 of the Cones of Calibration channel soon, so we're going to just revert all questions over from here on to the Cones of Calibration. One more thing I wanted to iterate is, no, I've said enough. This going on 2 hours here. I've said enough. So I can't think of anything else unless anybody has any last second questions. I think we're going to wrap it up for the night. I'm always on the server. If you guys have questions, keep in mind, I do run a business. I do stay pretty busy. So if you can ask the question in the server, ask it in the server. If you need my help, don't hesitate to message me. Just be aware of how much time I can spend. So no questions came up, guys, and we made it 2 hours. I hope you learned something. I hope this was helpful. It's amazing to see so many of you showed up today. That makes my heart so happy. Yeah, you guys have a wonderful evening. Happy New Year if I don't catch you on the server. I love you guys a ton. We'll see you next time. Bye.